Chris O'Connor here. Join our prestigious curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. Also be on the lookout for a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Now let's get started.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Emo. It's short for emotional. It's also more commonly known as an offshoot of punk rock and one of the most maligned subgenres in all of rock, and for good reason. It's characterized by excessively sincere and pained, emotionally fraught lyrics backed by speedy punk rock that veered toward pop punk in the 21st century. Before he joined Fugazi, Guy Picciotto was in a band called Rites of Spring that, while nominally a post-hardcore band in the mid-1980s, they effectively created the template for emo that would be built on and followed through with by bands in the next decade. Rites of Spring were actually really good and inventive. Their one self-titled album from 1985 was one of Kurt Cobain's famed 50 favorite records. In the 1990s, El Paso, Texas's At the Drive-In crafted a more aggressive, lyrically abstract variation on the sound that made them huge in the rock underground until their brief moment in the mainstream sun in 2000. Weezer's second album, Pinkerton, from 1996, commercially flopped at the time of its release, but its raw sound and confessional lyrics displayed many of the hallmarks of emo, and it eventually became a cult classic that is revered to this day. Of course, emo eventually got watered down to annoyingly soft levels from the mid-1990s onward by wussy boy, pretty boy emo bands such as Sunny Day Real Estate, Jimmy Eat World, and Dashboard Confessional. Nevertheless, the commercial inroads made by those bands opened the door for emo punk to become mainstream rock currency, especially on rock radio by the mid-2000s, or the mid-noughties, shall we say. This brings us to the two most commercially successful emo bands of all time, Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance. They both hit it big at around the same time, and they both royally sucked major balls. However, of the two, My Chemical Romance's foul stench emits the strongest odor. Mixing their emo with shades of goth and prog rock, which sounds interesting at the outset, My Chemical Romance actually made a brutal, screechy, whiny, unlistenable mess of this concoction. They truly are one of the most unfathomable success stories in rock history, and their sheer awfulness really deserves an entire episode for exploration and explanation. Hence, the latest installment in the Curmudgeon Rock Report's Shit series. Join us for Why My Chemical Romance Are Shit.
Now, Art, the brilliant rock and roll writer Rob Harvilla, he wrote a wonderful line and one of the best I've ever read to describe the bombastic, over-the-top nature of rock and roll. Quote, "Suspend your disbelief, respect their audacity." It's a great line. Yeah. Here's the problem, though. Harvilla, who is an old colleague of mine that I respect immensely, I actually think he's one of the best rock writers on the planet. He wrote that line about My Chemical Romance, New Jersey's finest, no, not finest band, My Chemical Romance. He wrote that in a retrospective article he wrote for The Ringer. And sorry, Rob, but My Chemical Romance is shit, and here is why. While I can definitely suspend disbelief, I actually cannot and will not respect this shitty band's brand of audacity. Frankly, I think that their brand of audacity is trite. I think it's gross, literally. And I think it's remarkably insensitive and non-steeped in anything resembling empathy. How's that one for you, Art?
Wow. I just think their music sucks. I
Yeah,
never
I mean,
I never thought of them as offensive. I just think they're just terrible. Let's talk about some good music, shall we?
yes, we shall. That rip that you hear in the background, accompanied by that spooky Ed Wood music, is the rip in the space-time continuum that will bring us to the other side of the universe, known, we call it the parallel universe. Yes, it's a science fiction trope, but it works. And over in the parallel universe, rock and roll is still king. Long live rock and roll. It's on the billboards, it's in the stadiums, it's on the radio. We're all boogieing all night long. We don't care about The Weeknd. We don't care about Ariana Grande. And the stuff that should matter does matter. That's a long, fancy way of saying this is where we cover new albums or newish albums by artists we think should excite you as much as they excite us. And we each take a turn here and cover new albums. We're both covering albums that have just come out in the last few weeks. And at least in my opinion, I'm not sure you share this one, Art. I'm thinking that these two records will be among the two best I hear all year.
I agree with one of them, not the other.
Well, of course, and I'll get into why I say that when I take my turn. But now it's your turn. What are you talking about on this episode, Art?
I'm talking about the new album by The Men called New York City. Now, Brooklyn, New York, The Men, they're from Brooklyn. They've been around for a long time. And since the late noughties, this band has cut a wide-ranging swath through the rock spectrum, shifting from super aggro noise rock to poetic and angst-ridden alternative rock that evokes the Replacements and REM, to Springsteen and Tom Petty-esque heartland barroom rock, to most recently pastoral folk rock. Now, the pandemic put a pause on their usual every other year release schedule, but they're back, and they are back with a rocket-fueled 1,000-watt battery up the ass, raging beast of a heavy rock album, easily the heaviest they've been since their early years. New York City is aptly named because in sound and spirit, it really does harken back to mid-1970s, early CBGB's era New York punk. It's less Talking Heads, Television, and Richard Hell, more the Ramones and the Dead Boys. But there's a twist. Take the heavier side of 70s CBGB's punk and filter it through a decidedly grungy filter that brings to mind late 1980s, early 1990s Seattle before it became commercialized and commodified. Less Nirvana and Soundgarden, more Mudhoney and Tad. Tracks like God Bless the USA just blast out of the speakers with an urgency most modern bands can't muster, and its faux patriotic sentiment cannot be seen as anything other than ironic. I is a blood-curdling sludge fest. Echo blisters at a 100-mile-an-hour pace with arguably the best punk riff any band has come up with this year. They haven't abandoned their heart on sleeve bar band tendencies either, as Any Way I Find You is the best British pub sing-along that Dr. Feelgood or Ian Dury never wrote. In a parallel universe where good rock music was still or is still part of the pop cultural zeitgeist, The Men would be a staple on rock radio, and New York City is already a candidate for my list of top 10 albums of the year. Chris?
As it is on my perspective top 10 album of the year list. Yeah, great stuff. I love the opening single, Hard Living, or Hard Living is awesome. At first, I mean, you mentioned Seattle, which I think is a good call because in my head, I was thinking if X and Wire had a kid, it might sound might sound like this. Yeah, this is just a balls out kick-ass rock and roll record, and it harkens back, like you said, their early stuff from 15, 20 years ago almost now was really, really this kind of propulsive sort of meaningful New York based rock. And so, yeah, like you said, having them naming the record New York City is just apropos and just awesome, awesome stuff. 30 years ago, there's a couple of songs on here, probably like the first 3 or 4 songs all would have been like radio hits on
Right.
rock radio. You got
Sure.
to think. I mean, hell, if like the Afghan Wigs were getting on the radio back then,
Yeah.
yeah, these guys certainly would have. And so that's a damn shame.
Yeah, for sure.
I really
All right.
believe that.
So Chris,
Okay.
now you got some hip hop for us.
Yes, we're doing a little bit of 180. We're doing, I guess you could call it a 180. However, in spirit, maybe not. So this is an album. I think it's a really, really exciting record by a young producer named JPEG Mafia. And the rapper, and many of you folks probably heard of this guy, Danny Brown.
Mm-hmm.
These two, JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, they have teamed up on an album called Scaring the Hose, Volume 1. Can't wait to hear Volume 2 because this is a genuinely exciting little record. It's 36 minutes long. It's JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown splitting the vocal duties, but it really is a showcase for JPEG Mafia's production style, which is really hard to describe. It's thrilling. He may be, now he's 33 years old, so he's not exactly a young guy, but he's one of the only guys in newish, new hip hop, this kind of underground, I guess you could call this sort of underground hip hop, that has a signature sound of his own that you can actually somewhat call innovative. And I'm telling you, it's chaotic as hell, but it's riveting as hell. And it's a 36-minute shot of the musical equivalent of a ketamine LSD cocktail, sample twisting industrial blender, man. You've got disco influences, trap house, dubstep, European industrial rock, punk, house, acid jazz, complete with druggy flutes. And druggy flutes is an actual thing, folks. It really does sound like the sound of a bad trip and a dystopian hallucination. And it's just very abrasive. It can be very metallic, but it can also be very woozy, almost like it's switching back and forth between codeine and mescaline. It's crazy. I mean, there's a song on there called Fentanyl Tester, which ought to give you an indication of these guys' sense of humor. It's very, very boyish, very, very juvenile. Brown did this album, and it's a little too old for us to do it in the parallel universe's vault. But
Yeah.
2011 album called Triple X. I
Great record.
highly recommend
Yeah,
it.
that's one of the best. That's one of the best hip hop albums of the last decade. Yeah.
Oh yeah, last 15, 20 years for sure. And it's fantastic because basically it's an ode to Detroit, street level drugginess.
Yeah.
It's a wonderfully darkly funny record. Now, Mr. Brown is basically sobered up since then.
Yeah.
And so he's a little cornier than he used to be, but he still has his moments. My favorite line on this record is, "They career like Whitney in the bathtub, sad as fuck," which is just, yeah, it's pretty tacky. A few highlights for you folks on this record. There's aforementioned Fentanyl Tester, which is this mashup of 8-bitish video game keys, doo-wop voices, swirling and echoes, drum and bass, and a sped up sample of the vocal hook from Milkshake, the great Khalees song, which is a little bit of an ode to one of JPEG Mafia's heroes, Kanye West. There's the title track, Scaring the Hose, where you get these banging loud ass drums and a catchy schizo vocal hook from Danny Brown. And you get this abrasive trumpet cutting across the beat, and it's just really tense and really intense. Then you get the song, which actually ends the record, Where You Get Your Coat From, which has got this woozy minimalist verse Congo thing going on. It's like just very like almost like a sprinkling Congo or conga beat, not Congo, conga beat. And then you get this startlingly maximal organ and drum thing on the chorus, and it's like damn near avant-garde. So there you go. JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown, Scaring the Hose Volume 1. Check it out.
Yeah. Yeah. This album is more interesting than it is good. To me, it's just like a long, tedious wash of static industrial noise hip hop. The majority of the tracks are overloaded with mashup samples arranged in this atonal way that comes across like a more tone deaf Jay Dilla. The best things I can say about this record is that several of the songs sample professional wrestler Edge's entrance music with
Yeah.
the "If You Can Know Me" intro, and the title track is pretty good. I like the title track with its
Yeah.
jazzy saxophone sample and that off kilter hand clap beat. That's pretty much it. I look forward to the new Danny Brown album.
Chris here. We mentioned music writer and critic Rob Harvilla near the beginning of this episode. We need to point you to an amazing podcast that Harvilla hosts called 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. Produced and distributed by The Ringer, the podcast does what it promises. Harvilla and guests focus on a single song each episode with humor, precision, and a wholly unique, unpredictable perspective. I personally most enjoy an episode on the tortured history of the Verve's Bittersweet Symphony, in which Harvilla connects the origin story to the Stone Roses and Oasis in surprising ways. Go check out all 77 episodes so far of 60 Songs That Explain the 90s. Yes, I said 77 episodes. Harvilla apparently has more to say about the 90s than your average cat. My Chemical Romance. Let's talk about this repulsive band. Now, you would think this would be a pretty good formula, right? Queen plus The Damned plus Minor Threat plus Thursday, very, very underrated band, Thursday, with a smattering of Queensryche. You would think that would be okay, but they bastardize it, and boy, did they bastardize the shit out of it. And we'll talk about these first couple of records here in a bit, once Arturo kind of explains and gives sort of a little bit of an origin story of this band. But here's the best thing I can say about the stupidity of these first two records. Now, mind you, this is a 25-year-old guy, Gerard Way, their lead singer and songwriter. Basically, the thread that goes through the first two records can be described as suicidal vampires and or zombies on the run and in love who eventually go insane and really enjoy each other's suicides.
Only from the minds of a comic book geek would this come from.
Yeah, but it's so surface level and so stupid, and we'll get into that. It's you would think that this would be cool, but it's just so stupid and so disgusting.
Yeah, we'll get into that for sure. But
Yep.
let's go do a little brief origin story of this band, shall we?
Make it stop. Go ahead.
The terrorist attacks of 9/11 served as a precursor to many negative and ugly aspects of American history. A reduction of individual freedoms and rights, the rise in aggressive right-wing xenophobia that we're still dealing with today, the misguided and misinformed war in Iraq that destabilized the Middle East, the utterly futile and useless 20-year war and occupation of Afghanistan. But perhaps the worst thing that 9/11 instigated was that it supposedly inspired a young comic book geek named Gerard Way to form a band called My Chemical Romance. That's the worst thing to come out of 9/11.
Okay.
Now,
Nothing I can say is going to top that, man. That was, and that is brutal. And supposedly that's true, but yeah, more on that subject a little bit later. But god damn.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Exactly why and how 9/11 deeply affected Ways, kind of unclear. Was it the feeling that life could end at any moment? Seize the day by going after your dream because you may never have another chance? With a band this shitty, who fucking cares? What we do know is that the band took their name from the title of Irvine Welsh's book, Ecstasy, 3 Tales of Chemical Romance. What we also know is that Way, as vocalist, drummer Matt Pellissier, and guitarist Ray Toro got together to record demos in Pellissier's attic shortly after forming as a band. After hearing the demos, Way's younger brother Mikey decided to drop out of college and join the band as the bassist. Now, the band must have had some serious networking skills because they soon befriended Frank Iero, guitarist for the punk band Pensy Prep, who were on local New Jersey indie label Eyeball Records.
Mhm.
Eyeball signed My Chemical Romance Iero joined the band as a second guitarist, and very soon afterward, the label released the band's debut album, I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love. Apparently, there's always an audience for shrieky, derivative, juvenile emo punk because after offering free downloads of their music on the website Pure Volume and the social media site MySpace, yes, MySpace was a thing back in the day, My Chemical Romance quickly gained a substantial online following. This drew the attention of Warner Brothers subsidiary Reprise Records, who signed the band in 2003, and the rest is dubious history. Chris?
Yeah, they certainly are one of the great MySpace success stories. I don't know if folks, folks our age and a little younger will remember MySpace actually. Looking back on it, it actually was a more enjoyable interactive experience than Facebook in the sense where you could, put in your own wallpaper, but you could also put in, I think it was like a Rhapsody player or something, where you could play music.
Yeah.
And so, My Chemical Romance had a MySpace page and would upload the stuff they were working on. And lo and behold, it's only slightly better than OAR becoming big off Napster 4 or 5 years before then.
Right.
But yeah, that whole 9/11 story, and we'll get into it, like this first record. Yeah, so there's a song on this first record, which we're going to talk about, called Skylines and Turnstiles, that to me is grossly offensive because Arturo and I have discussed this. We lived in Queens when 9/11 happened, and it really shook me deeply. It's one of those things. I still have a hard time talking about it in darker terms. There's a part of me that still wants to be patriotic, but for this kid who was an animator and comic book geek to turn it into this thing of almost like a march of celebration into death, where he turns it into a comic book death drama with like all these images of like skeletons rising to the sky and all this kind of stuff. And I can't abide by that, man. And he pokes this in this record, this really juvenile record with like all of this almost, it seems unironic imagery of suicide, that it satisfies him when the one he loves commits suicide. And there's constant references to it on both of these first two records that, man, how in the hell could this band have ever gotten off the ground being this offensive? And we'll get to that. It only takes one song to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, no shit.
Yep.
Well, you know what? We're going to do more than one song. We're going to discuss all 4 of My Chemical Romance's albums. Unfortunately, we're going to have to for this episode, right?
Yeah, lucky us. Yeah.
All right.
One. So, folks, you may not realize it, but we just had to take about a 7-minute break because Arturo had to go take a shit. That's how painful it is to talk about this particular band, My Chemical Romance. Now, let's get back to the rest of the story and cover this first record, which, what's the cheesy name again?
I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love, from 2002. Now, from the opening bass line of Vampires Will Never Hurt You, you know you're in the hands of the most generic, non-distinctive, tone-deaf, tuneless, emo punk drivel band imaginable. Shifty chord changes and tempo variations cannot make chicken salad out of this chicken shit. Honey, This Mirror Isn't Big Enough for the Two of Us moves at a breakneck pace. Too bad engaging riffs, engaging melodies, interesting lyrics, and anything approximating good vocals are left behind. Head First for Halos inexplicably made it to number 80 on the UK singles chart with its bland stutter stop riff and Gerard Way's appallingly obnoxious vocal delivery. Seriously, from top to bottom, this album epitomizes what smart critics and fans criticize emo for. You would think it's a parody of emo punk if Way wasn't so sincere in whatever bullshit he's going on about. It really is an unlistenable shower of shit, this album. Chris?
Yeah, I'm pretty much with you on that. I mean, just objectively, it's their worst record, but it's also one of the more disgustingly offensive records I've heard in a long time. Or I hadn't heard this album in a while. Let's just put it this way. I did hear it like 10 years ago or whatever. I don't know why. Spotify subscriptions, so they allow you the freedom to do that. So sue me. Uh, so this album is a disappointment only in the sense that a guy named Jeff Rickley, who was the front man of this really, really great band from New Brunswick, New Jersey named Thursday. He produced this record. They were label mates. Thursday were label mates on Eyeball Records with My Chemical Romance, and Thursday had a minor hit back in the early aughts. I think it was '03, called War All the Time. And
Yeah.
so they had their moment. And if you remove My Chemical Romance from the equation, there was a northern New Jersey post-hardcore scene, which post-hardcore sort of derisively became known as emo. But
Yeah.
Thursday and Saves the Day were probably the two most prominent and best known and best bands from that area. And so
Mm.
it's too bad, Rickley gets associated with this, because let's just put it this way: My Chemical Romance does not deserve to carry that band's water in the crowd at all. So where do I start? So there's this song on there called "Drowning Lessons." Now, this is what can only be called mental illness metal.
Yeah.
Now, there's a tradition for that. And I guess you could say that Gerard Way was an unmethed out, unwhite trash Jonathan Davis of Korn. Here's a here, here's a secret. I much prefer Jonathan Davis.
I think
Uh,
they both suck.
yeah, and well, here's the thing. Not really though. Like I said, the first Korn record I've come to respect, because yeah, it may sound stupid where a grown man is in a horror core voice is singing nursery rhymes.
And playing bagpipes.
Yeah, but as a way of depicting child sexual abuse, it's pretty damn poignant when you think about that. There is nothing remotely intelligent or remotely deep, non-superficial about this motherfucker, Mr. Way. So these are lyrics from Drowning Lessons. It says, "quote These hands stained red from the times that I've killed you, and then we can wash down this engagement ring with poison and kerosene. We'll laugh as we die, as we'll celebrate the end of things with cheap champagne." And so,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's basically what. Yeah, it's, glorification of suicide is one thing, but it's just like
yeah, but it's
suicide chic.
yeah, but it's never the glorification of his suicide. It's always uh, the glorification of the woman that he's obsessed with. Now, he has said in interviews, and it's pretty obvious through some of the lyrics and some of the imagery, that this is classic vampire zombie shit of,
Yeah.
like, I would rather, have you die and die, like die post death, than, be in eternity with me. It's like this kind of like, winky, winky self loathing, but it's disgusting. And he has this other tendency through all this. He's one of these like guys that's like so lazy that he confuses religious language with religious imagery. And let's just put it this way: he ain't actually playing Pontius Pilate anywhere on this record.
Mm.
There's a song on here called "Head First for Halos," and this is his attempt at capturing the spirit of Nirvana's wonderful ballad "Dumb." And let's just put it this way: the only thing about this song is that it's actually really, really fucking dumb, like really dumb, and grossly offensive again too, because obviously, "Dumb," the Cobain song, is about him and Courtney Love getting high and sharing their love in a codependent way.
Right.
But this song does that, by having them take red pills or blue pills or whatever the hell those are supposed to be, and then ends it with the suicide.
Hmm.
We all know what happened after Nirvana's "Dumb,"
Yeah.
but he takes the spirit of Nirvana's "Dumb" and he adds the suicide and the gratuitousness of that. And I don't know. To me, maybe he didn't mean it, but it's fucking despicable when I
Yeah.
hear it. Being such a Nirvana, and like I said, Cobain's one of my heroes. So when I hear that, I'm just, what the
Well, I
fuck?
mean, I'm just as offended as Fred Durst having a tattoo of Kurt Cobain on his arm.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, Durst in his own mind was probably, he thought he was serving the servants too. Although, yeah, he was serving them like what, like bathtub drugs and tattoos.
Here comes the next album, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge in 2004. Their major label debut and big MTV breakout album which is this one, is another slog of stupid, derivative shopping mall emo punk. I would like to say faceless, but Gerard Way's gothed up, glammed up mug craves too much attention in the
Yeah,
band's video.
babyface. He
Yeah,
used babyface. Yep.
yeah. I'm Not Okay, I Promise was a big hit, and I have no idea why. It's just a shapeless, formless blob of teeny bopper solipsism disguised as self righteous punk rock. Helena was the biggest charting single off the album, hitting number 33 on the Billboard chart. And like the previous single, it's all speedy tempos, boring ass guitar riffs, and heartstring melodrama. The Ghost of You, the other big radio and MTV hit from the record, is wash, rinse, repeat as far as the MCR formula is concerned. Do fans of emo punk even care about carefully crafted songs with discernible melodies and lyrics that are both smart and heartfelt?
Well,
I mean,
yeah, yes, they do, because there actually are bands in that genre that actually did all that.
not too many, man.
Not
Because when
not too many. This band did not.
Yeah.
Certainly did
And
not.
when people push back on me and ask me why I hate emo so much, I just tell them My Chemical Romance. That's why I hate emo.
Yeah, which, by the way, and let me just address that. Basically, calling My Chemical Romance an emo band is an insult to emo,
Yeah. Even but
because
that's what they are though. They're an
no,
emo punk
not
band.
really. I mean, here's why they got lumped in as an emo band. It was because of "I'm Not Okay, I Promise," which is the straightest in this period. At least those first two records, it's the straightest they played it. It's the least of those gory or those stupid or those, vampire, zombie, on the run, blood, guns, whatever. It's the least of that. It's the most straightforward, kind of pained breakup song on it. But it also, at the same time, you got to remember, this is what, like 04, 05. Around the same time is when Fall Out Boy, which by the way is a much, much, much better band. I know you're not on board with that, Arturo, but if I had to do my own episode,
Nope.
I would do an In Defense of Fall Out Boy record episode.
I'd rather kill myself than do that.
Ha 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 ha. But anyway, so this is the most Fallout Boyish song on the record. Pretty much the only one that would border on a classic Pete. What's his name there? Pete Wentz.
Yeah.
And the other kid, the one with the talent,
Patrick Stump. Yeah.
Patrick Stump. Excuse me. Patrick Stump is a really, really talented songwriter. But so this one kind of sort of approaches that, which is probably why A&R said, yeah, we got to put that on the radio. And so they get lumped in with Fall Out Boy, and Fall Out Boy is unmistakably an emo band. This band is basically taking cheesy 70s rock opera rock, and they're mixing it with glam metal and goth punk. And it's just this, stirring tsunami of shit. They take all these great influences, and there's more Queensryche in this band than anybody would care to admit, including them. It's just like, again, it's a tsunami of shit that historically gets called emo because of the place and time and the competition. So
and the shrieky vocals.
And the shrieky vocals. That's that. So I needed to dispel that. They're not really an emo band, because all of the emo bands you can think of are better than this band.
On this episode, we pinched our nose and examined the atrocity of My Chemical Romance. For the next episode, though, we're going the opposite way, and we plan to cleanse our palates by examining and even celebrating the work of a band that time has seemingly forgotten. In Excess. From the mid-1980s up until the early 1990s, this band was ubiquitous on both rock and top 40 pop radio, with countless hits, especially from their 1987 blockbuster album, Kick. The hits dried up by around 1992, but one would think their massive critical and commercial success would have secured their status as a legacy act. Instead, the opposite has happened. It seems millennial and Gen Z music fans have utterly ignored or forgotten this once great pop rock band, especially when held up against contemporary peers such as U2, The Cure, and Nick Cave, all of whom enjoy varying levels of reverence among younger generations of rock music fans. What happened to INXS? Why did their popularity wane? Why have they been forgotten? INXS superfan and Gwangju, South Korea radio DJ Daniel Springer will be a very special guest as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you In Defense of INXS. Okay, now we move on. The next one. We're halfway there, folks. We're almost done.
Yep.
The Black Parade from 2006. Now we arrive on their biggest album, the one that brought them to the arena rock stratosphere.
Mhm.
They expand their vomit-inducing emo punk formula, at least the way I see it, to incorporate progressive rock, goth. They already had the goth image. Now they're actually trying to put goth music in here,
Yep.
and shades of heavy metal. Now, does it work? Hell no. It's still atrocious. Garbage in, garbage out. The song Welcome to the Black Parade was a massive international hit, going to number 9 on the Billboard chart and even number 1 in the UK. And by God, is it awful. With its maudlin, almost piano ballad intro, it breaks into horn arrangement melodrama and more speedy, non-distinct emo punk nothingness. Imagine a group of ambitious 14-year-olds writing the most inane lyrics imaginable while musically trying to merge Queen and Jimmy Eat World. It's shit. Famous Last Words was the second massive single from the album, even going to number 8 in the UK. Seriously, the Brits freaking love this band.
Yeah, they did. They still do. Yeah.
They still do. And it isn't. This song is bad, but it isn't as bad as their normal fare. Make no mistake, it still sucks, and Gerard Way's lyrics and voice are still overbearing and overwrought. But the guitar interplay is at least interesting, and a discernibly interesting riff is somewhere in the mid-tempo mix. I Don't Love You has a surging intro and riff that I swear is a ripoff of Coldplay's Yellow.
Yes, I had that in my notes too. It is definitely a ripoff of Yellow. At least the first half of the song. It's fucking obvious.
It's ridiculous, and it's probably Gerard Way at his most sentimentally schlocky.
Yeah,
his most tone deaf, and at his over emotive worst.
Yeah, and he has to rip off Chris Martin to do it.
Yeah, I know, which is pretty bad.
Yeah.
Teenagers was the third massive hit off the album, going to, you guessed it, number 9 in the UK. And is the closest thing the band has ever come to being tuneful and catchy and sounding like, and actually kind of sounding like a punk band. That's interesting.
You know why?
Why?
You know why? Because they stole the riff from T-Rex.
Ah, there you go. Unfortunately, that one song cannot save this steaming pile of horse manure of an album. It's a concept album / rock opera about a man dying of cancer and what he experiences in the afterlife. You would think such weighty and heady subject matter would elicit some genuine growth and depth in this shittiest of bands. But nope. Of all the big albums by big bands, quote unquote, The Black Parade, in my opinion, is by far the worst. Chris?
Yeah. Here's the problem with this record is that the stupidity and the musical quality in some ways are mutually exclusive. There's a streak on this record from like the title track there, Welcome to the Black Parade, all the way through Mama, which is pretty good if you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
There are some good tunes, and there's one song near the end of the record, which I think is actually a fantastic song called Disenchanted, which is actually a celebration of cynicism that doesn't come across as like dopey and there's, no zombies and vampires and dumb shit. It's just basically an ode to cynicism, and he plays it straight. And it's got a pretty melody, and it's like, whoa, okay, so this guy's actually capable of not being a jackass. But But that's the problem, is that elsewhere he's just a jackass.
Yeah.
Although, you know who disagrees with us, by the way?
Who?
The voters of the Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Albums of All Time 2020 edition, as the
Had
Black
this
Parade.
album?
Yeah, the Black Parade came in at number 361.
That's ridiculous.
And just remember that Bob Dylan's Desire did not make the list in 2020. Okay, so
Wow.
and again, there's lots of, basically this is like an equal opportunity theft record. So the song "Mama," which is a lot of fun, stupid but fun, because it basically rips off the sound and the style of the Bob Fosse musical Cabaret, with Liza Minnelli making a guest vocal appearance.
Of course.
Yeah, because and Liza says, "I love those guys." Yeah, you would, because they wear as much eyeliner as you do. Uh, and so there's that, but they're also, and this is wonderful, by the way. You and I might be two of the only people that would admit to being able to get the reference, but the song "House of Wolves,"
Yeah.
no joke, may actually be an homage to Kiss's "Music from the Elder."
It wouldn't surprise me because
Yeah.
he's a comic book guy. Kiss are basically a comic book band.
Yeah, and 1982. This was Kiss's last ditch attempt to, in their makeup period, to go prog. And it was their last ditch attempt to like save the face paint. And
Right.
it's an underrated record. It's actually kind of like fun theatrical metal. It's kind of like Gene Simmons doing his best to be Meatloaf. Yeah, go figure. That's two shit episodes in a row where we're name dropping Meatloaf, by the way. So before we move on, and again, there's just lots of things you can say about this. I need to read this, and you will laugh at this, Arturo. This is genuinely funny because of the self-unawareness of this. Gerard Way, now 2022 Kerrang, which is otherwise, I love Kerrang because they're so like unapologetically happy to be covering heavy metal.
Yeah.
Of all stripes. It's a cute magazine, but they unearthed interview with Gerard Way from 2006, published it in 2022. And so let me just read this, and it's part of the transcript, the questions, and then his answers. So the interviewer says, "When you've talked about the inspirations for the Black Parade, you've mentioned two masterpieces from the 1970s, Pink Floyd's The Wall and David Bowie's The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars." And Way responds, "I hadn't even thought about it until very recently, but it's almost as if we're trying to spearhead some kind of neoclassic rock movement, bringing the pageantry and the theater back, paying tribute to those old songs, not ripping them off, sure, but a total tribute. We wanted to capture that glory, that over-the-topness, and that essence of classic rock in the 70s. And then the interviewer comes back. In terms of its lyrical content, The Wall was a heavy album. And Gerard Way responds, "Oh, yeah. It's coming from a place of a guy in a rock band playing giant shows in arenas, and there's groupies around, sex, and drugs. And yet to a 15-year-old kid with his parents on vacation, that being me, I mentally identified with the alienation in that record. I'm not a rock star at that age. How the fuck did I get it? But I did get it." Yeah. And then I'll just share one more thing to share before we move on. So critic named Tom Erlewine, Stephen Thomas Erlewine is his pen name. He's been writing for All Music since All Music became a thing 20-something years ago.
Yeah.
And he's the only one of their critics I like. He is one of the more underrated and underappreciated critics in all of rock criticism, because he's basically made his profile on an otherwise kind of crappy site.
His review of the Black Parade is the classic example of damning with faint praise.
Yeah, and that's why I was going to say it. He's actually got some a really smart line in here, and you'll see why I'm bringing this up, because you longtime listeners know that our last episode we shit on the Killers, literally. Why the Killers are shit. So let me read this from Tom Erlewine. He says, quote, "It was all quite reminiscent of how the Killers set up Sam's Town with endless name dropping of Bruce Springsteen and U2, But where the Las Vegas quartet wound up with an unholy fusion of these two extremes, MCR never synthesizes. They openly steal from their holy trinity, then graft it upon the sound they've patented. Often, it seems as if they've copied The Wall onto tracing paper and placed it upon Three Cheers, the record before that. The story of the
Yeah.
Black Parade is nearly identical to The Wall. And then later on, he has this great line, and I totally agree with this. This blew me away. And it's funny. He says, quote, "The Black Parade does not feel like a revival of 70s Prague as much as it harkens back to the twin towers of mid-1990s concept alt-rock. The Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, and Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar."
Hmm.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And
So
it's way worse in both of those albums.
yeah, way, way, way worse. I mean, those are actually I love both those records. So yeah, so lots to talk about. Do yourself a favor, folks. Download or go find Disenchanted by My Chemical Romance, and then physically block your children from ever accessing any other My Chemical Romance song after this episode. Please.
Yeah. Well, we've come to the end of their discography, their last album, Danger Days, The True Lives of the Dangerous Killjoys. Now, how do you follow up a concept album that was a huge international hit and placed you in the top tier of arena rock bands? Well, you take a page from the Pete Townsend playbook and do another concept album.
Damn
this
right.
one this one takes place in California in the year 2019. Remember, this album came out in 2010. The apocalypse has happened, and a group of rebels wage war against an evil corporation. While it sounds like the premise to a Muse album, a funny thing happened to My Chemical Romance on their way in trying to become the Who of their generation. Now, there's a terrific YouTube series by one of my favorite influencers, Todd in the Shadows, called
Train
Records. Train Records, right?
Mm-hmm.
In each episode in the series, Todd examines an album by a big name artist or band that either commercially bombed or was artistically terrible in such a way that it either altered the career trajectory of said band and artist or ruined their careers completely. Todd really should devote an episode to this album because Danger Days commercially bombed spectacularly.
Yes, he did. Yes, they did. Yeah.
In an epic way. Whereas the Black Parade went 3 times platinum in both the US and UK and sold 4 million worldwide, Danger Days went just gold in both countries, with most sales coming in the first couple of weeks of its release, and sold just 1 million worldwide. More ominously for the band, not a single song from the album was anything approaching a hit. After the tour cycle for the album, the commercial indifference to the record must have really stung the band because they actually broke up in 2013.
Yeah.
Now, is the album as bad as its lack of relative commercial success suggests? Of course it is. This is My Chemical Romance, remember? Give credit to the band for trying to really change up their tired, juvenile, shopping mall friendly emo punk by injecting it with power pop and electronica. But power pop in this awful band's hands sounds like heavily processed, pompous, rah-rah cheerleader rock of the Andrew WK variety.
I love Andrew WK, so
I can't stand him.
his first record's a masterpiece. So
get out of here! It's a fucking
so step lightly.
Horrible album. See the album's insufferable opening single, "Na Na Na." It gets worse. "Na Na Na" is like the worst song Andrew WK never wrote. The Only Hope for Me Is You has some truly embarrassing lyrics and proves that MCR can take a subgenre that is defined by being instantly accessible, power pop, and rendering it void of anything catchy or engaging. Sing, with its corny synth washes and wannabe rousing chorus, sounds like a horrible Pepsi commercial. Planetary (parentheses go) goes for outright 4/4 rhythm techno rock, but comes across like Disney Channel teeny boppers trying to be hip and cool. It's pop rock that's trying a little too hard to be an earworm, but lacks the requisite songcraft.
Yeah, basically it's Muse without balls or sense.
Right. Bulletproof Heart is just atrocious and it's overly earnest, us against the world affectations. Like, geez, no wonder their fan base turned on this horrible record.
Yeah. Well, what they did is, and I guess they grew up. Maybe they felt like having a huge successful hit kind of freed them up from what they'd been doing. And you got to remember, Gerard Way was sobering up in the middle of the making of that piece of shit before it, or before this one, the Black Parade. He was sobering up, and he had mental illness and drug issues, and so he's in a better place here. And so I guess you can say, yeah, fine. It's a silly sci-fi concept record, but it's kind of weird for a band to go from ripping off Queen, the Misfits, the Damned, etc., to ripping off Bon Jovi and Muse from one album to the next. It's just stupid again, and he just has this tendency. Gerard Way had this tendency of mistaking stupidity for glib, ironic humor.
Yeah.
I mean, he certainly was very, very, very good at the former. You see the song called Party Poison, which is basically it's a let's have a great time before the world ends or we end up enslaved or some other bullshit like that. Who cares? Ha ha ha. I mean, it's a pretty rocking track. Otherwise, it's dance rock type of thing. But
Yeah.
well, like I kind of mentioned it with the last record, these last two records, there actually is some enjoyable pop music and something assembling some pretty good musical chops. It's the insincerity and the stupidity and the look at me-ishness of it all that kind of ruins the proceedings. So it gets so bad with this record in terms of the lack of inspiration that there's a song on there called Summertime. And let's just put it this way. It's basically a ripoff of 1979 as performed by the lineup on the Smashing Pumpkins album, Adore. That's how bad it is. So 1979, if 1979 had been done during the Adore sessions.
Yeah, like right when the Pumpkins started to suck.
Right. And so, but I do have to give these guys credit for one thing. This album ends with a song called Vampire Money, which
vampires are back.
Yeah. Well, it was genuinely funny in the sense of, like I said, those first two stupid records that have all that vampire zombie, let's kill each other to glorify each other, nonsense.
Yeah.
Well, by this time they had rejected it. Why? Because the Twilight series had made it into teeny boppy money. Had made it, Hollywood was vampire crazy in 2010 when this record came out.
Right.
That was at the height of all that, Twilight with the hot vampire versus the hot werewolf with Kristen Stewart and her amazing inability to not smile, lighting up the screen. And then, but you got to give them fun. So they're kind of goofing on that whole thing, and maybe they're kind of having some fun. But he was way to the end of the band. He was completely, utterly self-unaware to his dying day. He did an interview with New Musical Express in 2010 where he says about Vampire Money, he says, quote, "Originally, what we did was take goth and put it with punk and turn it into something dangerous and sexy. Back then, nobody in the normal punk world was wearing black clothes and eyeliner. We did it because we had one mission: to polarize, to irritate, to contaminate. But then that image gets romanticized and then it gets commoditized," which is an incredibly unself-aware statement, by the way, because
a band is basically a pop band themselves.
yeah, exactly. Well, one, they were a pop band themselves, but come on, man, with all those like suicide, let's call it for what it is. They're really murder fantasies.
Yeah.
In the context of vampire fanfic.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty romanticizing to me. Now, don't it? Now,
Yeah.
And then when you do two records in a row, that record, okay, so that got us into the majors. Let's do the same fucking record with a Fall Out Boy ripoff that gets us famous, but let's do the same fucking record. So not only are we romanticizing vampire murder fantasies, now we're commoditizing them. Correct?
Yeah,
So,
I agree.
So Okay, so fine. By 2010, he had grown up, he had sobered up, and he had rejected the sort of the vampire stuff and the cynical cashing in on that stuff. But man, he still didn't get it. He still
Yeah,
didn't get
no,
it.
it's just a lack of awareness. I mean, I guess when he by 2010, he was so famous and so big that like certain people who become like rock stars of this level, they become unself-aware.
Yeah.
Uh, and by the way, Roger Waters is guilty of the same shit.
Oh yeah. I mean, lots of bands are. I remember I had a an interview a long time ago with that guy from the Gin Blossoms, Robin, whatever the hell his name
Yeah,
is. And
yeah.
there he was. He was like basically stuck being a bar band in Tempe, and he's talking about himself like he's world famous. So yeah.
you,
So
you had some hits in the '90s, man, but come
yeah,
on.
he did, but by then, no, he was playing "Baby One More Time" during happy hours out in Tempe. Yeah, I know. Imagine that. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just
Here's the question, Chris. What are My Chemical Romance fans like? Like, I know they definitely have a fan base, a pretty large
yeah,
fan base,
no, they do, and
a big
they
venue.
were kind of they were the kids that they're the disaffected teenagers. They were the I mean, and Way has talked about it that they've had fans come up to them and say, hey, your music saved my life. And so yeah, you are talking about goth kids in the classic sense, but and I mean, this kind of speaks to what social media has done.
The goth was never in their music, though. The goth was always in their look,
Yeah,
not in their
the goth was in the image, and like the Damned was I guess you could call it goth punk, but it was more like it was more close to the industrial stuff. It was more Bauhaus. I
Yeah.
mean, which Bauhaus in sound, but not in theme. Does that make
Right.
sense?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that they were never goth in theme, just look.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they did have, when they for whatever reason these what sound like pro suicide screeds. And then not only that, but Welcome to the Black Parade. That is let's face it, for as dumb as it might be, it is a really good, solid pop song. I can understand why that became a big song. It does have, that anthemic 3-part thing will never go out of style. And so I can understand why. And then it's an anthemic kind of, join us in this parade. If it's almost like join us in the disinfection. Yeah, and yeah, disinfected because it's fucking diseased, but disaffected. So join the disaffected. The revolution of the shit upon and the bullied. Let's all go to our graves. With all this, and so I can understand why they have that fan base and that appeal. But here's social media for you that these Gen Xers, or excuse me, these Gen Zers, and they have this thing that if it was done before 1990, maybe it doesn't count. They don't want to know about the past,
Yeah.
and so now My Chemical Romance's legacy is obviously spilled into the music. Similar kind of what you could call glam metalish kind of stuff. Here, there are bands on the radio or bands coming up that were clearly influenced by My Chemical Romance. You are getting this idea that they're a legacy band. They're placing on greatest albums of all time lists as as the populace gets younger and more diverse. They're coming there, and so it's kind of like, look, here's a way to analogize it. You and I were huge Pearl Jam fans, right?
Yeah.
If it hadn't been for Pearl Jam, I would not have gotten the inspiration to discover Neil Young and the Who.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay, who's better, the Who or Pearl Jam?
The Who.
No shit. Now there are going to be uh, people out there that love My Chemical Romance, but then when you say, and yeah, they were really influenced by the Misfits. It's like, who the fuck are those?
Yeah.
Who are those guys? And it's
Yeah.
like, you know, uh, but it's like, oh, they were influenced by Queen. Oh yeah, Queen is just all campy. Queen does its own thing, and so they're going to look down their nose or whatever. So they don't see the lineage, and
They
they
don't.
don't.
Yeah, and that's another broader issue to talk
Yeah,
about. I
and
think.
yeah, social
You know,
media
it,
has social
yeah,
media has dulled critical thinking among younger music fans.
it really has, and it's just this inability to just acknowledge that history and the world existed before you were born,
Yeah. Well, but yeah, there is a certain cutoff, and I don't necessarily see it as self-absorption. It's just for whatever reason.
It's definitely a symptom of
Well,
self-absorption.
is some of that, but what it is it's this dismissal of history, and it's that
Yeah.
groupthink. Everybody's online at the same time, and everybody has, it's that hot take culture, and so who cares about?
Here's what you want to tell these people: in 20 years, the next generation, they're going to dismiss your music, motherfucker.
Yeah, they are, and and that's the thing. It's like Tuesday's hot take is not the same thing as Saturday's hot take. Who cares about 5 days ago? So we're all up in this hot take cycle, and I think that it's really doing a disservice to just history and appreciation. So if it's like, there's a few music writers that I follow on Twitter, and like you'll get some fans sometimes that are like, yeah, Neil Young is old and washed up, and baby, they're just for boomers. And like, the music writers, Brian Hyatt, who writes for Rolling Stone, is an old friend of mine, comes back and says, that's exactly like the stupidest thing ever. It's like, no, it's not. No, it's not. It's like nobody under 60 listens to Neil Young. And, and so I try to chime in and say, hey, man, if it hadn't been for Young, we'd have no Pearl Jam, which means we'd have no, Nickelback or whatever. And so, so I'm 45 and I've listened to Neil Young. He's like, yeah, whatever, dude, you're wrong. So,
yeah. Well, at that point, tell me exactly how are you right? Because basically, in that argument, you're putting up salient points, and that idiot who you're talking about is not putting up any points at all.
Yeah, I'm right. You're wrong. I'm telling you, and like this is during the Joe Rogan Neil Young Neil Young feud, and that ought to tell you something. Like these late 20 somethings, like early 30 somethings. I mean, I'm telling you, if we're living in a multiverse, we're in the dumbest timeline.
Right.
And I think that continuing reverence for a band like this, where they begin to outshine the influences and the influences become stuck in the rearview mirror, that's troublesome. That's troublesome.
But then My Chemical Romance are going to be forgotten too.
Yeah,
it's going to happen to them.
Yeah,
because
which
in 20 years from now, the next generation they're going to look back. Who the hell are these guys?
Yeah,
and all these. Remember, My Chemical Romance are a millennial band. I mean, they're from millennial.
Yeah, right.
They're a millennial generation band.
Well, but not even. Actually, that's the pathetic thing, and we haven't talked about this much. Gerard Way is born in 1977.
Yeah, he's 2 years younger than us.
Yes, and so he's 24 when he gets his supposed 9/11 epiphany, which again is just insulting as fuck. One way or another, it's insulting. And he does his zombie suicide tandem when he's 25 and 27. So he's like an overgrown 13-year-old, And so it's like, if anything, it's kind of like an indictment of Gen X, of how stunted we are,
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, hell, it took me till I was 45 to get married. Fuck, So there's a lot of stunted people born in the mid 70s. Maybe Mr. Way is one of them. So
right.
Oh boy,
Chris, we have reached the end of this painful.
Yes, that got headier than it had a right to be there in the last 5 or 6 minutes. But yeah, so My Chemical Romance as an existential crisis, as a rock and roll iconoclastic geek. Wow.
Yeah.
Who knew? So, this has been fun. And folks, I know that we've done a double helping of shit here in this month, but we promise we're getting back to something way more positive on the next episode. And let's just put it this way. Before your homework assignment is to get back in touch with your devil inside, devil inside, devil inside.
Yeah.
My last line was indeed a reference to the Australian band In Excess. Sadly, they perhaps are a forgotten entity among younger generations. But darn it, the Curmudgeons must resurrect In Excess and explain why we admire them so much. And Gwangju, South Korea-based DJ Daniel Springer will help us do just that next episode. Tune in and learn about perhaps the sexiest band of all time. I say that as a secure married man. Come on, though. Let's face it, they really were that sexy. For now, Chris O'Connor and Arturo Andrade are out. Remember to join our Facebook Curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock and to follow us on Twitter at CurmudgeonPod. Take care, everyone.